Hi, everyone. Hi, and welcome to our conversation tonight. I'm super excited to be here with one of my favorite humans in existence. And also one of my favorite humans who I just like to spend a lot of time with in general and share space with. So I will go ahead and start by introducing myself. I'm Ruby Joy White. I will be the moderator for our conversation tonight, but really, like, Aisha doesn't need a moderator. But I use present she pronouns. And to describe myself, I like to say that I'm kind of like half sociologist, half creative. Is how you can kind of see me. I do a lot of equity and racial equity work in general, whether that be consulting or on the day-to-day. I'm also pretty involved in the creative art scene here and consider myself to be a creative writer, curate all kinds of installations. I'm a part of different art shows and whatnot. So that's kind of the space that I'm in. And of course, I like to talk about wellness and to dig into wellness and what that means, especially as a person of color, a Black person, a queer person, and all of those things. But I'm super happy to be able to share this platform tonight with Aisha Edwards. I'm going to go ahead and read this really outstanding bio so that I don't mess it up so that the people can really know who's here with us tonight. So Aisha Edwards, Z and she pronouns, is a fire-breathing light warrior, somatic liberationist, writer, healer, and the proud child of Jamaican immigrants. Z organizes Radical Rest, runs a private practice in downtown Vancouver, Washington, and speaks publicly on the intersection between somatics, body intimacy, and social justice. Their personal mission is to heal the internal legacy of slavery in 2 generations through radical anti-oppressive somatics. Z believes that all beings can find and embody the unbroken. Oh, yes. We're here for it. That's a fantastic video. So that's
hi, everyone.
So before we hop into, as I like to describe earlier, this postdoctoral thesis of an outline, this conversation that we're having, I would love to know from your perspective as a healer, as a somatic healer, how do you feel that the pandemic that we're all experiencing and navigating has been impacting our minds and our bodies?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to answer this question, and then I'm going to go get my Postmates. So you're going to have to awkwardly talk to the audience for a second. So I have this whole idea around, oh, they're knocking on the door. Hold on.
So also I want to go ahead and mention, as we are having this conversation tonight, the chat box is hot and live. So if you all would like to put any questions in the chat box, send any kind of comments through, any yeses, any like no's, any kind of anything, please, I do encourage you to be as engaged as possible.
Hey!
Okay, but wait, what did you order?
Go curry. What else? My favorite food. Okay, so this idea between like self-wellness and the pandemic. I have this thought process around this idea of what I call like the trauma umbilicus, right? And so when the pandemic hit, and of course we've had different iterations of how we've been experiencing the pandemic over this last year. Can't believe it's been that long at this point. But the first and most continuous experience, like the theme of the pandemic, is a level of powerlessness and immobilization. And immobilization is one of the 3 factors when an event or an experience is registered in the body as trauma. Immobilization is one of the things that makes trauma trauma. And so we have this like, collective experience that is immobilizing us, and thusly becomes like this umbilicus link into our own experience with powerlessness, with immobilization. And because our bodies are not capable of just having like, I can't just feel the powerlessness right now of this moment of this pandemic. I feel all of the powerlessness that I've ever felt forever throughout my entire system, right? Because our memories don't work like, a slide that we pull up, our memories work like a recognition of a pattern. And so when the body recognizes this pattern, then we have a whole response process that shows up to that pattern. So anybody who has any form of trauma is waking up to this pandemic, the powerlessness of this pandemic, and then it stirs up all of our stuff. And some of us have more insight around our relationship with powerlessness and how we navigate that with efficacy or not. And some of us have no insight around that at all. And so as we've been watching the sort of like rates of suicide tick up and the like desperation for mental health and the like starvation for particularly like providers of color in various forms of care practice, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the idea of this like trauma umbilicus that we're all sort of linked into.
Right. And so with that being said too, there's not really like a template or any kind of how to get through a pandemic if it's something that we've not experienced before. And so I kind of want to shift over into kind of like the meat of your talk tonight, which more so has to do with understanding how the body and mind intersect, and more so focusing on body boundaries and navigating through these times.
Yeah. So somatic defense, that's kind of like the whole idea that I want to kind of share here is like, how do we even understand how to defend boundaries, our body boundary? What is a boundary? All of these qualities that kind of come up and that are deeply connected to this trauma umbilicus. So if our experience of immobilization has been for so many of us related to episodes or experiences of interpersonal violence or some form of interpersonal boundary violation, and we have felt dissociated or immobilized in the context of that, it's like, having to live in that space or that way constantly. And if you don't know sort of how to kind of work your way out of it, it's easy to just get stuck there. And given that we have, for all of us, we have these various coping strategies, some of them healthy, some of them not healthy. And, we have less and less and less access to those things that help to keep us organized and regulated. So I think it's helpful in kind of talking about, this whole talk is called Somatic Defense, Body Boundary Practices for Radical Self-Care and Wellness. It's helpful to start, I have a whole thing that I will be reading off of. So it's helpful to start.
Probably thick pages.
With like, what is a body boundary in the first place? Because like, frankly, most people have no idea. And one of my favorite questions to ask people in groups, and I would love to hear people write in the comment section, what do you think a boundary is? Because 9 times out of 10, the answers that I get are like, what? And yet it's a word, especially for people who are psychologically savvy, it's a word that people say and use all the time. And the way that they often use it, the way that language can like make things really rigid, like they'll use it in these really rigid ways when like a body boundary is really anything but rigid. So I will read my definition of a body boundary, and I'll read it twice. A body boundary is a permeable energetic field around the body that supports distinguishing self and other. It supports self-protection and the development of intimate mammalian connections. I'll say that one more time.
Yes, and can you define mammalian? I thought I was a thesaurus, but never mind.
Right? Any of us who has a cat knows that they have a body boundary. They're like, not interested.
Unless they're interested.
I have a cat, his name is Peaches, and he very much has a very clear body boundary. He's not like one of those cats that likes to like get all up in your stuff. Like he likes to sit next to you and like, don't touch him. Because if you touch him, he will give you an offended face and he will walk away. So That is how you respect Peach's body boundary. Nobody here cares about my cat. Okay, I'm gonna keep talking. I'm gonna read this one more time. Body boundary is a permeable energetic field around the body that supports distinguishing between self and other, supports self-protection, and the development of intimate mammalian connections. So what I'm really interested in this whole definition is permeable and energetic. Like our body boundary, you know, you want to call it your aura, like, you know, whatever. It's really the electromagnetic field that surrounds you. And in addition to that, then there are all of these sensory pieces that are part of that body boundary that are in your fascia. You know, your fascia has something like 3 million sense receptors. And the information that it's giving to your brain at all times is pretty profound. So it's the way that we are organizing ourselves in space, in every direction, in relationship with gravity and all of the other objects around us, including static objects that are unmoving in any given moment. It's how I can sort of sit here, you know, facing the screen and all the lights coming down on me and blah, 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 and have a sense of the room behind me.
Right.
Right? So the way that our body boundary develops is not a mystery, you know, like it's not like woo, woo, woo coming out of the ethers. Like our body boundary develops through an evolutionary pathway in our early years. So a lot of the time, you know, people talk about children as being resilient, and they are, but they also aren't. And especially if they're under the age of 7, the things that happen that impact their worlds around them have a stronger likelihood to have a more global impact in how their bodies are organized and how their bodies are operating. So as a provider, I specialize in working with early developmental trauma. So I specialize in working with trauma under the age of 3. And one of the kind of burgeoning parts of my practice is working with in utero issues and birth-related trauma. And when we have this kind of trauma that's really associated with like the developmental sequence, the entire body organizes around that. Because during that period of time of in utero to around age 3, we're going through these sensory motor developmental patterns where one layer or one level, one reflex builds on top of the next, builds on top of the next, builds on top of the next. And so if we miss one, you know, for any of you who have raised children and, you know, when you think about your little ones, they have like a sort of sequence of like, you know, learning how to like lift their head up and learning how to, get up on hands and knees and learning how to like hold up on a wall, learning how to sit up. All of those things come in a sequence. And if you miss one level of the sequence, if you skip a level of the sequence, if the body is not quite getting a level of the sequence, like for example, if you have a baby that crawls, but they sort of drag one leg, they have like a scoot drag, that can potentially be a missing of a sequence. These pieces then have later implications in the global organization of that person's motor development, of that person's neuromuscular connections, of that person's attentional capacity, of that person's organization of themselves in space. So, you know, it's the development of the body boundary, to kind of summarize. The development of the body boundary really happens in that first 3 years of life, and then it cultivates throughout childhood. But those first 3 years are really critical in the sensory motor patterns and the sensory motor development.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Or if you could clarify.
I probably need to get some water in a second.
You probably need to get to your meal as well.
Open up that Postmates, okay?
Please do. We're talking about self-care, so care of thyself. I'm wondering if you could actually give a more nuanced definition, or rather a leading of what trauma actually is. Because I mean, kind of like boundary, I feel like trauma is used a lot, and I don't know if folks actually understand like how it's organized. Mm-hmm. And I think that you would probably give a really thorough perspective.
I think one of the things that I really like about trauma is it's a very permeable word. I think that people get a little like, especially people who've had like really extreme forms of trauma, will sometimes feel like people who are describing things that are like kind of categorically less extreme as trauma, they'll get offended by that. But it's important to remember that like there are, what trauma actually is perception. The perceived experience creates, is what makes a trauma a trauma. So there are three factors that make experience, an event, or a set of experiences or environments traumatic. The first is that it overwhelms the autonomic nervous system. So if you're a person who has a very, fragile autonomic nervous system, or an autonomic nervous system that has very little capacity because the organization of these sensory motor systems were not developed correctly, if you're a person who has that sort of like non-robust autonomic nervous system, you're getting overwhelmed by smaller things than other people. And so something that, for the next Joe Schmo is like, whatever, for you could actually be traumatic because of how flooding it is. So number one, that it is something that overwhelms the autonomic nervous system. Number two, we feel a sense of immobilization, like we can't act, we can't do anything about it. We feel a sense of powerlessness. And again, it doesn't have to be a real powerlessness. We just have to perceive ourselves as powerless in the face of whatever is happening. And so this is really important when you're thinking about developmental trauma, which I'll distinguish between that and other forms of trauma in a second. That's really important to think about, because this early period of time where you're 0 to 3 or 0 to 7, like you don't really have much say in what's going on around you. So those early experiences that globalize the sense of powerlessness then become a sort of operating system that your nervous system is organized around throughout your life. So your tendency, again, to see yourself as being immobilized in situations, or experience yourself as immobilized in situations, is more likely, even if everyone else around you can see that you're not powerless. So that's 1 and 2. 3, you don't feel like you have access to socio-emotional support. So I come back to this idea of mammalian, because mammals, which humans are obviously, mammals organize ourselves in safety in relationship. It's how we understand relationships. So belonging is this currency that keeps us safe together. And because mammals tend to survive together in groups, we have evolved the whole system for how we do that and how we help our species survive, right?
Right.
And so if we don't have what we perceive as a socio-emotional support to help us hold the energy, or the way I like to think about it is somebody else's nervous system to join your nervous system, so that the two nervous systems combine, and then like Captain Planet, you are more powerful together. But like that's basically what I'm talking about. That when these two nervous systems combine, there's more capacity to be able to like hold the intensity of whatever that experience was. It's really fair. Right.
So I'm going to let you grab your water, but I'm going to be asking a question while you do that. Okay. Or whatever it is that you need to do. Can you hear me still?
I sort of.
Okay, I'll wait 1 second. And also, like I said before, I see that there are a couple of comments, mostly of like excitement with being here. So shout out to Miko. Thanks for being here tonight. Super happy to have you in the space.
I'm excited to be here too.
If there's some other folks who would like to go ahead and start talking about the things that are coming up for you or how this is landing for you, I really do implore you to do that. But the question that I have really quick, and I know that you're going to be digging a bit deeper into our conversation, is the last part about trauma that you mentioned, more so talking about how humans essentially are social beings and how we find safety in relationships and whatnot. I feel that this piece is what's missing because of how we're having to navigate the pandemic, having to be physically distant from the people who we find safety in. And so I am wondering then, do you feel that we are all experiencing trauma because of that?
No, I don't. I think that some people have figured out how to do that in ways that are effective. Like, for as much as this like Zoom doom life is like challenging, it also still offers us some capacity connection. Think about when I first started to do like telehealth stuff right in the beginning of the pandemic. I'm still able to have my entire empath response pattern where I can feel my patient's feelings in my body through the screen. So it's not impossible. I think there's also these other kind of creative ways to go about making connection that feel real, whether using digital technologies or spending time in the outdoors. And furthermore, I think that we as humans really struggle with the fact that like we don't only have to connect with humans. Like connecting with our non-human world is equally nourishing in a different way to our nervous systems. So finding a multiplicity of ways to go about that form of connection is really important. But if we're really rigidly focused on only connecting in one way, like I go to the bar with my friends and that's the thing that I do, right? Or like I go dancing and that's the thing that I do. Or like I go out of town, on all of these trips and like that's the thing that I do. If there's no flexibility, I mean, in general in trauma, what we're looking for in healing is flexibility. So if there's no flexibility, something else is usually going on that's like interrupting people's capacity for connection. Okay. So yeah, and so that's one. And then two, other folks are living in different ways anyway, living in ways that are more mutual aid supportive, living in ways that are more communal. And those folks are already set up for a little bit more interpersonal nourishment than folks who are living alone or, living with just one housemate or, something just with their family or, whatever.
Right.
And when I say their family, I mean they're like nuclear Western.
Like their unit, their cluster. Yeah. So thank you for that. And that's really helpful for me to figure out how I've still been able to find connection, even though I'm somebody who likes to be around other people. And mind you, I don't live alone, but I only live with one other person, but also find that connection with, say, my puppy as well. And so I'm going to pause really quick because I want to go ahead and go through some of the things that our audience members are saying.
Okay. And as you're pausing, Ruby, do you want to know the disaster of my life right now is that
yes.
people gave me food with no utensils and I
cannot. Oh my God.
There's no utensils here.
That's terrible.
My food is just gonna look at me.
Basically, they're judging you for like not cooking your own food. They're like, no.
Rude. It's very rude.
So Danielle Zimmerman is saying preschool teacher out here, love the 0 to 3 references in background.
Yeah.
Right? Let's see. Heart Healthcare for
Danielle,
Artists.
You teach me something over here.
Right? Heart Healthcare for Artists says, I appreciate the definition of boundaries. I find that we get so stuck on repeating phrases that we forget to fully understand the meaning and power of words we are using.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you froze a little bit. Still a little frozen.
Are you there?
I can hear you. Your face is still frozen. Okay, you're coming back now.
Okay, good.
Marissa Wolf says, this conversation is both gripping and illuminating. Thank you. And lastly, Galen says, this explains so much. For example, my daughter lost her twin sister at birth. That early trauma I've struggled to understand when I see it playing out today. And she's 15.
Wow, I can't even imagine. Galen, there's so much there, because like even in the womb, twins are so relational, and that like first experience of like coming into the world being loss that's huge. That's really huge. If you want to make some connections with some folks that maybe can help her, I have some good resources in our like Portland Metro community that would be a good support.
And so we can follow up with you, Galen, or I can follow up with Galen for those resources. And then lastly, before we continue, Miko says, would being outdoors and in nature count as a connection, similar to pets and humans?
That's an easy answer. Hell yeah.
So as she said, Galen, hell yeah. Galen, sorry, Miko. I saw Galen say I would appreciate that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right, so we can continue on with our...
Yeah, so to give another, like a little bit about trauma, there are sort of two kinds of trauma that people talk about regularly, and then one that I think is important to also talk about. So one is developmental trauma, which is what we're sort of describing, and frankly is the kind of trauma that we don't usually acknowledge as a culture. Developmental trauma is really unique because it shapes the way that somebody's body functions. When we're little, we really need these like socio-emotional connections and sensory motor movement patterns and all of these things to develop the brain-body communication pathways. And when we don't, and essentially the fascial postural tone that gives us the sense of like, I can move through the world with grace and ease and confidence and like an embodiment of like, I'm here and present. Whereas, you know, shock trauma is like an event that happens. And it's not to say that developmental trauma doesn't also include shock trauma, but developmental trauma doesn't have to have specific shock traumas to be a trauma. And this is particularly challenging for people who have developmental trauma but don't have shock trauma, because their experience of themselves is often, I don't know what's wrong with me. When the two are together, that's called complex trauma. And one of the challenges of developmental trauma is that you're much more likely to have complex trauma later in your life, to accrue traumas the more that you are traumatized. Simply just because, again, like I was saying earlier, that if you have developmental trauma, your nervous system is not likely to be very robust. And so you're going to be overwhelmed by stimuli pretty quickly and pretty easily. The stimuli could be innocuous. It could be light, sound, sensory, any other kind of sensory cues. It can be the orientation that somebody is to you in space. It could be background noise. It could be a whole host of things that create stress and tension for people. Like I'm even thinking of somebody that I knew who they had, like when they would look out on like wide open spaces, because of the way that the eyes organize in the early sensory motor development, like they had trauma physiology on those reflexes. And so when they would look out on a wide expanse, they would start to have a panic attack. You know, and if you don't understand what's happening to you, you know, you just think you're weird or that there's something wrong with you.
Right.
But when somebody's able to explain it in that context and then give you exercises or movements or essentially like kind of physical therapies or somatic therapies to help to shift those patterns, then it's like you get to live a completely different life, which is very cool.
Mm-hmm. And so based on that information, one question that I do wonder is, does everybody experience trauma?
I think everybody has some form of trauma, yeah, have had experiences in their life that they could or would describe as traumatic. You know, the degree of how intense that trauma is varies from person to person, you know. But yeah, I think the daily traumas, especially in the context of a society that is dysfunctional, is par for the course. And that brings me to the third form of trauma that people don't talk about, which I think is important to talk about, which is societal trauma. For those of us who have identities on the intersectional spectrum, navigating the trauma of living in a culture that continuously holds your identity as less than is a part of daily life, of like having to work through this. Frankly, I would describe it as an identity shame that you're constantly being bombarded with and having to overcome and overcome and overcome and overcome. Mm-hmm. I mean, at its most elemental, it's an identity shame. At its most horrific, it's like murder and death and genocide and, you know, all these things.
Annihilation, essentially. Yeah. Right. And so by intersectional identities, you're talking about those more marginalized sociocultural identities. So those folks of color, queer folks, trans folks, non-binary folks, folks who exist within the marginalizations of, I want to say, societal reality.
Folks of disability, folks who are working poor or impoverished, folks who are homeless, folks who are incarcerated, anyone on that spectrum of marginality.
Right. And so when we're talking about the organization of all of these traumas, I am wondering now, like, what are some techniques, or rather some strategies that folks can kind of tap into?
I think, how long is our talk?
We have 30 more minutes.
Okay. Let me contract all of my thoughts.
Which I know is hard for
you. Because in order to even, one of the things that all of my people that I work with do is they jump too fast to, what do we do to fix it? And so much of how we heal from these forms of trauma is we slow the process down, and we stay first with, like, what's happening here? Like, what's the information? What's actually coming through? And I think that it's in order to kind of grasp how the body boundary works, we sort of have to have some information about the body boundary. So the body boundary is sort of like the paying attention systems. And so we have a number of like sensory systems that are part of our body boundary. They include our vestibular system, which helps us organize ourselves to acceleration, position and posture, and gravitational direction. It helps to trigger motor reflexes. It helps us maintain our equilibrium if we get, knocked off of our footing, and it helps us coordinate motor functions. So oftentimes people who have motion sickness have difficulty with their vestibular system. Our proprioceptive system tracks where the body parts are in relation to each other and movement in general. It supports maintaining muscle tone, which is, I can't even express how important that is and how you feel in the world. It supports maintaining muscle tone, the sort of organizational map of your body. So a lot of the people that I work with have what's called kinesthetic amnesia, where they can't feel parts of their body. So it's really hard to orient yourself in space and feel safe if there's whole parts of your body that you can't track. It's also impossible to be able to clearly move in the world if there's whole parts of your body that you can't track. If there's whole parts of your body that are not giving you information about who you are or what's happening for you. So that's a really big key. It also helps us with learning kind of motor patterns and like general coordination. And the tactile system, which helps us track touch, pain, pressure, temperature. Again, if we have kinesthetic amnesia, these are whole things that we are not tracking, and it increases the likelihood that we'll have a shock trauma. Like, I burn myself because I can't actually feel how hot something is. Like, that's a big deal. Or I bump into things all the time because I actually can't feel the whole left side of my body after I had that car accident. That now I have all of these, this experience of trauma through my proprioceptive system on one side of my body. So this is how one trauma then kind of blends and blends and blends into other traumas. And then the the auditory and visual systems are also parts of how we orient ourselves in space and sense the world around us. And it's that felt sense that gives us or helps us track what is safe and what's not safe, who is safe and who's not safe, where is safe and where is not safe. And if we don't have full access to all of these things because they've been either not integrated correctly or because they have been compromised because we've experienced some form of shock trauma, then we're sort of walking around the world half blind, if that makes sense. Well, I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of this reflex stuff, but what I do want to say is that there are a set of reflexes. They are 3 different kinds. One, they're called neurodevelopmental or primitive reflexes, equilibrium reflexes or writing responses, and the early motor reflexes. Those reflexes are all what help to organize our sensing systems and coordinate through the cortex. So if we don't develop that healthy coordination through the cortex, that's what sort of creates this loss of connectivity with self. One of the ways that I sometimes talk about that is that in order to exist when you were a little person, if you have this kind of developmental showing up, in order to exist as a little person, you had to be out here. Like being in your body wasn't safe. So the way that you existed, the way that you survived is that you came out here. Well, if you're out here, you can't really defend your body boundary. So I want to do some practices with folks that will help us kind of get into the body a little bit and to just kind of explore some felt senses. So I'm going to get down on the floor since I can't eat my food and it's just sitting here laughing at me.
You gotta be more on top of things. And also we were fine with pushing time out another 15 or so minutes. So please don't feel rushed. And is this an activity that you're inviting?
Yes, so I'd like everybody to participate if they can, if they feel comfortable. You're always welcome to just observe. This first one that we're going to do is just a meditation. And the second one we're going to do will involve some auditory experience. Let me tilt my camera a little bit. All right. So we're going to do just a little bit of listening within. So feel free to find a position that feels very comfortable to you. I often invite people to lie down as we're working. One of the ways that we can maybe bring some depth to the breath and help to support kind of coming into our lower rest and digest tone is we might bring our legs up onto a couch or on a chair, or you can even let your legs rest up on the wall if that is available to you. If that hurts your lower back, you can put a cushion behind your lower back. Just opening some space to just find breath. In all of somatic practices, the most important place that we start is a place called yield. And yield is just this space of resting into a supported surface. For those of you who have babies, you know that when they are first born, they really can't do anything but yield. So our first organization in the world, our first orientation to gravity is about this place of connecting with supported surface and the felt sense of gravity coming through the body and the ground reaction force pushing up on the body. So just take a few moments to let yourself settle into some breath and this space of yield. Lightly experiencing the breath at the nostril. Feeling the support of the back body against the ground. Or if you're sitting, your whole lower body supported by the floor. And the first channel of awareness that we're going to bring some intention to is the skin. So bring your hands to your shoulders, maybe like so. Or you can rest your hands here if that feels okay for you. This is the beginning of the lung channel in traditional Chinese medicine. And so just bringing some hands to the skin and letting your awareness rest between your hands and your skin. Bringing some felt sense to how is the skin doing. Does it feel dry or brittle? Juicy and moisturized? Weary? Lax? Tight? Leathery? Just take a moment with noticing the quality of your skin. Can I even feel my skin? Does skin feel different in different places? We're going to gently move hands now. We're going to bring the hands to the heart with just a little bit of pressure, just a very little bit of pressure down toward the belly button. And so here we're going to explore fascia. Fascia or connective tissue is that layer that's just beneath the skin. But more accurately, fascia goes through every tissue in your body. It's connected to your skin, it's connected to bone, it's connected to your organs, it's connected to your muscles, it's connected to your brain. In some circles, consciousness is considered the emergence of the fascia. That all of the sense receptors in the fascia are what we understand consciousness to be. So just taking a moment to feel into how's your fascia doing? Again, is it tight, achy, sore, electric? Emotional? Soft? And gently bringing hands now a little lower to the sort of front of the hip flank. Or you can rest your hand on the right side of your body at the lower part of your ribs. And here we're going to examine muscle. The hip flank is in a little bit of an easier place because it's a large muscle. And so letting your attention sink deeply into your body and just noticing what is the quality of this muscle. Now, if you're holding here at your ribs, you have the intercostals here between the ribs, which are small muscles. Whereas if you're here on the top of your quad, it's a large muscle. So just paying attention to what's happening at each of these places. the muscle achy, overly constricted? Does it feel loose and easy, spacious, tired, unused? And now bringing hands to the back body. So as you can see in the picture here, I have my arm behind my back at the base of my rib cage. So we can either hold arms like this, or we can hold the lower parts of the back of the ribs like so. Here we're going to examine bone. You can also hold the back of your head. That feels more comfortable to you. So taking a moment here to imagine the bone, whether we're exploring the rib or ribs, or feeling the vertebra, or the whole skull. Just letting yourself notice the quality of bone. Again, can you even find it? Is it spongy or strong or brittle? Each of these layers is giving you information about how your body is experiencing itself in space. We'll take our last few moments here of this visualization and self-experiencing to come back to the layer that you enjoyed the most. So of skin, fascia, muscle, and bone, what felt the easiest for you to be in? And let your attention just rest there for a few more moments as you breathe. Feeling into some curiosity around what about feels easy or so good or so pleasurable. What's the quality of that pleasure? And take a moment to let yourself reorient to the room around you by opening your eyes and letting yourself come back into the space with consciousness in the eyes and fingers and toes, a little gentle movement in the body to wake up the tissues. And if there's anything that you noticed about any of these layers that you want to share, please feel free to post them in the chat. We'll talk a little bit more about them or answer any questions. If we have a little bit more time, I'll do another leading, but for the moment we can do a little bit of chatting.
So we'll give you all about a minute or two if there's somebody who would like to share anything, share how that landed for them, or just comment on anything specific.
And I'm going to try to eat my food with a papadum.
You just need to keep a set of celery. So take a second to let yourselves come back.
Yeah, how was that for folks? Anybody have any thoughts, feedback? Like, oh my God, I can't feel my body.
Or has anybody possibly not experienced that or done an activity like that? And how did that feel for you? And you're kind of frozen again, Aisha. I don't know if you can hear me, but you're still frozen. Okay, you're back.
Sorry.
You're back. All right.
It's very spicy.
Miko says, I felt very present for the first time in a long time. Thank you.
You're welcome, Miko.
Miko, who's also Jamaican.
What?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Does anyone else have any questions or?
I think not at the moment.
Okay.
Probably it's just like sitting with you all, but as we move toward the end, we'll give some more space for you all to comment. That food looks fire. I'm not even gonna lie.
It's way good. I've been sitting over here just looking at it like, how do I get this in my mouth? I don't know what to do. So why don't we do another little exercise? This one might have a little activation to it. So please, use good judgment.
Oh, somebody also just said, Yumari says, body scanning is difficult for me, and I found myself getting distracted, but hearing your voice focused me back in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes we need a container. Again,
Oh, you're frozen again. The internet is really just trying to make sure that we are not being great tonight.
I know.
I wonder if it could be helpful.
Yeah,
oh, you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear and see you now.
Okay. So the thing I was going to say is that, when our nervous systems join together, we have more capacity. And so even though you are wherever you are, I'll just safari, even though you are wherever you are, like my nervous system joining with yours helps it easier for you to get deeper into your own system. So if you find that like going inward is a challenge, which is often the case for people who have trauma, you might, if you want to cultivate mindfulness, you might try to do mindfulness in spaces with other people. If you have a partner or a pet, having them touch you while you are doing mindfulness can be helpful. So that touch doesn't have to look like anything other than even just like resting against the person. So using some of those kind of nervous system hacks, basically, to help you be able to get deeper into the work. It's full of bones, though. They left all them bones in there.
That's how you know it's fire.
They just hacked it right up.
Right. So we'll give about a little bit more time for folks if you all want to. And also, as we continue on with our conversation, feel free to just keep dumping things in as you have been, and we will definitely just get to everybody's comments. Mm-hmm. But I want to go ahead and make sure that we can shift over to our next kind of activity. And like Aisha says, it could cause some activation. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of go into what you mean by causing activation?
Yeah, so like when you start to feel a little bit of like a flutter or like I feel a little uncomfortable, or I feel a little uncertain that this is like, you know, some signs of the exercise might be too much as you start to feel contracted. You feel your muscles constricting. Especially if you feel like you're out of your body for any reason, if there's a tunnel vision or anything like that that's coming up, just feel free to stop, come back to yield, walk around the room, anything like that. If you feel like a sense of like exhaustion, or those are all signs that it's too much. But this exercise is called 3 No's. So I'm gonna change my positioning again and stand. And I invite you to stand with me. There's rice all over my office. So, okay. I'm going to stand back so I'm a little better, more visible on my anti-fatigue mat. So we're just going to take a moment to let yourself just find your feet on the ground. If it feels better to have hands on your chest, on your tummy, you can feel free to do that, just to give a little tactile cue of soothing. But find a positioning that feels really good for your body and let your feet really come into the ground. We're going to do no's at 3 different levels. So I'm not going to make them auditory because I'm on camera and on mic and I don't want to yell at you. But the 3 different levels we're going to do is at a whisper, at a normal speaking voice like this, and then shouting, if you're in a space in which you can shout. And then the 4th one I'll have you do is saying 3 no's at any of those volumes that you want in a mirror. The first time, we'll take a moment to reflect, and then after each time, we'll do the same reflection. So get your footing again, come back to resonance in your body, feel yourself on the ground, let your feet fully rest into the ground. Your knees in relation to your ankles, your hips in relation to your knees. Your belly button in relation to your hips. Your diaphragm in relation to your belly button. Your shoulders in relation to your diaphragm. Your neck in relation to your shoulders. Your head and crown in relation to all the rest. And we'll take a moment first to just whisper no 3 times. No, no, no. And then feeling into the body, just noticing how that lands in the body to hear your own voice and the quality of that word no. Coming back again through your channels of skin, fascia, muscle, bone. If you'd like to, you can practice it again. No 3 times. And just noticing each of your channels of awareness. And then again, now at a speaking voice, finding your feet on the ground, and then again 3 times, and again noticing through the channels of awareness. So, no, no, no. And now feeling through again, how does your body experience your no? Which is the most rudimentary form of boundary. And then as you're ready, if you're ready, we'll move into our shouting. It doesn't have to be a big shout, but just a shouting. I'm not going to shout because of the microphone. Again, finding your footing and with some volume behind it. No, no, no. And then letting yourself again come through the channels of awareness. Skin, fascia, muscle, bone. And then lastly, if there's a mirror present, or you can step into a room with a mirror, like the bathroom, we'll do the same exercise again, and you can just 3 times find whatever level of vocalization you'd like. Find your footing. And when you're ready, again, no, no, no. And let yourself feel through how you experience that in your body. That's skin, fascia, muscle, bone. And then take a moment to just shake it all out. We'll come back together again to do a little bit of talking, connecting. If you need another minute, let yourself just kind of orient yourself back into your space, your home. I'm just over here eating with my fingers.
Yeah, that's that. I'm trying not to eat on camera, Lean. So folks, also feel free to share how this one landed for you.
Yeah.
And I know that like me doing this exercise in the past has definitely caused activation. And so do whatever you need to take care of yourself if you need to step away or drink some water or anything like that too.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I want to go ahead and thank you for actually showing us techniques that we can utilize center and kind of do those body scans and whatnot. So I hope that for folks who are here with us tonight, it makes a lot more sense applying the things that Aisha has talked about to some of these movement techniques.
And I would say that these are more awareness building techniques. Like, I think that we can't really have an efficacious relationship with our body boundary if we don't even have awareness of it. So more than anything else, these are cultivation strategies and not even necessarily defense strategies, because I think boundary self-defense is such a complicated subject, because there's the level of like, can you even hear your body's no? And once you can hear your body's no, can you respond to your body's no? And then once you can hear and respond to your body's no, are there other energetic forces that are also like trying to cross your body boundary? And that's a whole other conversation.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, you probably need a month to talk to all of us to, get everything done. But I know that we are running low on time.
Yeah.
And so I want to go ahead and offer you the space to maybe talk through your last bits of content for this evening, and then give a little bit more space for folks who do want to ask a bit more questions or comment and whatnot. And then we can kind of just wrap up on our time today. And then of course we'll let people know how they can find you and access your work and read your blogs and listen to your podcast. So you all will be able to still have Aisha or exposure to her after this. Really quick, Nico said, I really like the term awareness techniques. These exercises definitely helped me exonerated more awareness, is what I think that Nico's saying. Yumari says, whispering the no's to me felt the most vulnerable. I felt shivers, goose pimpling on my arms. The shouting was the easiest and most surface. What might that say?
Mm-hmm. Yumari, I'm wondering, and this is like just probably like a little exploration exercise for you to think about, is it easier for you to be like boundaried it with strangers or with people that you don't know very well, or with people who are not intimate figures in your life, but that the closer that someone comes in, the harder it is to say what the boundary is? That's often the case for people who have had, challenges in their closest relationships in their lives. It's easier to be kind of public, but more difficult to be private. Yeah.
Yumari says that is correct.
Mm-hmm. So practice whispering no. It will help.
That mouthful.
I know, it's bad.
I'm all about eating food in meeting spaces. We definitely need to prioritize that more. It's not unprofessional because obviously we're still eating this really great stuff. Tara says, oof, that's real.
Mm-hmm.
In response to what he said.
And so like that intimacy that you have, like I have this belief that there's a progression to healing and somatic liberation from externalized oppressions. And that progression really is this kind of idea of like body intimacy, body trust, and then body sovereignty. And body intimacy starts with these like cultivation practices of awareness, of being able to actually feel into what's happening truly in your body. And once you are able to do that with some consistency and regularity and a sense of like, I understand how I am and my response patterns don't frighten me, then you develop a sense of body trust. And the more that you trust your body and trust your body and trust your body and trust the things your body is telling you over and over and over again, then you develop a sense of ownership and a sense of like autonomy over your body that is unalienable. And I think personally, the liberation from colonization and capitalism happens through that progression, that once we get to a place where we feel a deep sense of sovereignty and right, a sense of like entitlement and righteousness around our own physical human form, that it can't be, managed away in productivity hours, then we start to have real embodied pushback.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel also that is something that is starting to take place, as I feel as the pandemic continues to ravage on, that people are starting to seek out those more alternate ways of being, and also really kind of seeing the fractures within the structures that we've been operating in more glaringly?
Oh yeah. When it's like during the wildfires, and we're like having to pretend like everything is normal when like literally the world is burning down around us. It's like, no, something's wrong here. Something is wrong here. Mm-hmm.
Tara also says, yes, that is a super helpful frame.
I'm glad to hear it.
With the mouthful.
Mm-hmm. This goat is bomb though. It's really
it looks bomb. It does. I'm gonna need a reference to that place. So what would you like to lastly share with our group today? And yes, we know that our time is limited. You all will definitely leave feeling, I want to say, hungry for more, feeling like something is missing. And that's the whole point of this, so that you can continue to do your exploration on your own. But yes, I'll go ahead and give you that space.
Fill time. I'm still chewing.
Oh, Aisha's still chewing. And also, if there are some questions right now that you all might have for Aisha, you can go ahead and start funneling those onto our chat function today, before we end our time together. And then I am also wondering, because I did see that on the back end, our friends at Portland Center Stage at the Armory, which thank you all so much for hosting this event with us today.
Yes, thank you.
Did
support
put Aisha,
PCS.
Yes, support PCS all the way. Support all of our arts organizations.
Yes, please.
If you all do scroll up, I see that Portland Center Stage did post Aisha's website, but I'm wondering, PCS, if you can just go ahead and post that now so folks don't have to scroll back through.
Yeah,
and
also post my Instagram, which is at Aisha at full_flight_wellness. Like, I don't even know what my Instagram is. It's terrible.
And if you all you're just not big on socials. And if you all do already just follow Portland Center Stage at the Armory, which is really awesome, then you can go ahead and also just find Aisha's page there, because Aisha is tagged on there for the event tonight. So just as an FYI. So go ahead, Aisha, with your closing remarks for us tonight. But you are frozen, so I don't know if you can hear me.
Am I back?
You're back now. Oh, and thank you,
Yeah.
PCS, for posting IG as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Comcast in this area is just trash. So any kind of last pieces here around this body boundary or somatic defense is, more than anything, the thing I would say is, if you feel a sense of fragility around your body boundary, your energetic boundary, like, find a provider that understands how to work from an early developmental perspective. Find movement providers. Movement healers are really great for working with this stuff. So people who do things like Feldenkrais or body-mind centering or the Alexander method, Alexander technique, like those approaches all involve these like early developmental movement patterns, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. And there are folks in town who do that kind of work, who do reflex integration work. It will really change your whole life if you begin to explore the kind of earliest of the early that created the foundation of who you are. So, and then outside of that, like the things, if you want to like find me on things, so I have a podcast that's called Emergent Liberation Collective, with a group of other somatic healers who live in different places. One lives in Marin County, one lives in Boise, one lives in Vancouver, BC, and they're all awesome and incredibly intelligent people. We just put out our first season, and we'll be coming back with another season in summer. So the whole podcast is about embodiment as the vehicle for personal healing and collective liberation. And we are sort of moving toward having like people contribute content as well. So we'd be happy to have listenership, and also to have people participate if they want to offer any things for the podcast. And then I have a website that has materials on there, meditations, and I have this little working.
Comcast won't let you be great. You're frozen again.
Am I back? Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
What was the last thing you heard me say?
I don't even remember.
So I'll say it again. I have a digital workshop coming out probably later this month or early April that is about working with traumatized parts of self. And then there's a little booklet that goes along with it on my website. And then, yeah, on my website, there's a blog where I write a lot of essays about somatic themes and how we live out those somatic themes in a culture that's fragmented and traumatized. So.
Yeah, and they're really great. I'm just gonna say I'm a fan of those.
Thanks, Ruby.
So thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Aisha. You're amazing. You're dynamic. I hope that you all got a lot from this conversation, which obviously this conversation needs to be way longer, right? It needs to happen way more often. But hopefully it got you a bit more curious about digging deep for yourself and trying to figure out what are those things that you want to do to become your whole self in an uninhibited way. So I can go ahead and leave a little bit more space. If you all have any questions or comments or anything else, go ahead and dump those into the chat box now. Miko says, thank you.
You're welcome, Miko.
And we thank you so much. I want to go ahead and mention that we will be live again tomorrow.
Yay!
And with Tip Keo, we're going to be talking about radical meditation and thoughtfulness and centering wellness in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. That will be tomorrow and live at our Twitch and Facebook and YouTube accounts through Portland Center Stage at the Armory. And that will begin at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So thanks so much for being here with us tonight. And we hope you all have a great evening and a happy weekend. Galen also says thanks so much. Tara says thank you with a heart.
Thank you.
I don't want you to touch your computer with your fingers right now.
It's just like COVID over here. It's all
all around. Thank you
all right, everyone.